This is Field Notes from The Proving, short reflections from inside the process of building a life that's earned. Have you ever noticed how life slowly starts to feel like math? Like if you work harder, if I stay disciplined, if I control the variables, eventually the equation should solve itself. So the real question becomes, what happens when the equation does solve and the answer still feels wrong? For most of my life, I believed that success worked exactly like that, like an equation. Effort plus discipline minus the distractions you don't need, divide that by your time equals a result. And honestly, that equation worked. But once you start believing life works like math, you don't just follow the equation, you start to optimize it as much as you possibly can and in pretty much any situation. You start thinking in terms of inputs and outputs. That if I double the effort, maybe the output will double too. Or, if I double the discipline, maybe the results compound. Maybe there's some coefficient somewhere that I can increase. Maybe there's a variable that I can eliminate. Maybe if I square the effort, the outcomes even scale faster too. And before long, you're not just living your life, you're solving for it, adjusting every possible input and redefining and refining the variables within it, trying to produce any right answer that you can. And if you just apply enough effort, if you just stay focused, if you show up consistently, then things start happening. And those things could be anything from promotions, opportunities, your body changing, losing weight, skills improving, progress appears, whatever it is. And when you start to see the results, it weirdly reinforces the belief that this formula is working. But the interesting thing to me about this formula is that the outputs were almost always external. Titles, recognition, results, progress, things that other people can see. It's a little like thinking if you just say the right things, if you show up the right way, a relationship will automatically work. Or believing that if you just follow every drill perfectly, that you'll always win the battle. The equation can prepare you, but it can't always solve the human part. Because for a long time, I didn't really put any work into that part. The formula did that for me. It became my baseline, or at least I thought it did work for me. And once you start to see life that way, you begin believing something very simple. Okay, I understand the system now. And once you believe you understand the system, you start to do what any overachiever would do, which is you start to master the variables. More effort here, a little distraction there, a little more better habits, better discipline, add a little bit more structure and reinforcement. You become someone who can regulate yourself, someone who can always perform, who can always produce results consistently. But somewhere along the way, the voice shifts. It stops being you and it starts to become me. For me, I look at myself this way to some degree, I almost became this like Michelin star chef of my own life, or like a professional baker who's constantly measuring every ingredient extremely precisely, every action calibrated, every input accounted for. My mind could run the formula in nanoseconds, calculating exactly everything it would take to get the job done. And actually, no, that's a lie. Not just to get the job done, not just to win, not just to progress, but to literally crush, outperform, outsmart, outwork, solve the equation faster than anyone else in the room. And the strange thing is, that system rewarded that mindset. And it was amazing because when you treat life like a formula, precision looks like success. To some degree, discipline looks a lot like strength. Control looks like leadership. And over time, something subtle begins to happen. The formula stops feeling like a strategy and starts feeling like obedience, but like a structured obedience or something. Almost like it's like you've been handed a manual for how life is supposed to work or something. Like you follow these steps, you apply these inputs, ignore the noise, forget the constraints. They don't apply to you. Solve for the outcome. And if you grew up being the successful child, this is normal for you because you learned early on that doing things the right way produces results. From the outside, honestly, I would assume it looks impressive or reliable, disciplined, maybe even successful. And in many ways, it absolutely is. And for like a while, you kind of go on with life like this. And because it seemingly works and you're living a life that you've always wanted, you solve the equation, you do the right things you're supposed to do, the results show. Simple. And it's kind of nice that life is a little bit simple that way, isn't it? When the results come, the work seemingly match the effort. I don't know, seems kind of nice, which makes like to question it even harder because if something is clearly broken, you know what to fix. But when something is working, you assume the system must be right. So you keep solving the equation literally again and again and again. And the more it works, the more confident you become in the strategy. And honestly, you start believing the formula is timeless and super, super effective. And that if you just keep applying those same inputs, the same discipline, the same level of intensity, the same grit, you'll keep producing the same outcomes. For a long time, this was my life, and that belief was true. But the part that I didn't understand then is that sometimes the strategy that built your life quietly becomes the strategy that traps it. And it's like not because the formula really failed, but I guess maybe I changed or the world changed or the stakes change or something changes. And when that happens, you don't really question the system. We double down on it. That's what you know. You work harder, you push more, control even more variables, solve the equation again, continuously solving, because questioning the formula means admitting that we might not know exactly what we're doing anymore. And that's a terrifying thought. But eventually the thought shows up anyway. But eventually something subtle starts happening, not dramatic maybe, or even probably obvious, just a quiet thought that shows up from time to time. You start asking yourself questions like, why does this feel heavier than it should? Or like, why does progress seem really empty? Or I really put a lot of effort into this and I got the success and I did get the 100 and I was first and I did this, but I don't really feel anything. Or why do I keep solving this equation, but I never quite feel finished? And eventually another realization pops up thereafter, something I haven't noticed or really didn't notice for a really long time, that somewhere along the way, I created this invisible opponent. It wasn't enough to just achieve the outcome for me. I always needed to demonstrate some level of like intensity over it to prove that the win wasn't accidental and to prove that it was something more. So even when the equation was solved, I kept raising the stakes and creating resistance for myself, manufacturing this pressure because beating the outcome wasn't enough. I needed to defeat something. Even if the opponent only existed in my mind, I had to do it. And I guess that's when the first crack really appeared, because you start realizing the equation might be solving, but the system itself is exhausting you. Because what I found out was that formulas are very good at producing visible outcomes. Like we said, titles or, results, recognition or progress, but formulas don't always show you, which is the invisible trade. Sometimes when you push one variable really hard, something else quietly decreases somewhere else. And I don't know, that could be a bunch of different things, I guess, between energy or you're giving up some joy or some curiosity in life, certainly freedom, identity. You create a surplus in one area, but create the deficit in somewhere else. And just to me, the strange thing is you don't often notice it while it's happening because the formula was producing the result. So you overlook it because you know the output is so sky high that it must, fill the deficit somewhere else, right? And eventually the question becomes unavoidable. Not did the formula work, but is this the formula I want to live inside? Because the thing about systems is that they're great at producing the outcomes, but they're not always great at producing meaning. And when that realization starts to settle in, something inside you begins to shift, certainly quietly at first, and maybe internally it moves around in your body and you kind of have that weird queasy feeling, but noticeably later on, which is that you start realizing something uncomfortable, that the life you built might actually work, that the system might be functioning exactly as designed, but there's still a deficit somewhere you can't ignore. And once you notice it, it's very hard, very, very hard to pretend you didn't. Most people spend years building formulas that help them succeed. And that's not a mistake. It's part of growing up. But eventually every formula has to evolve because the goal isn't to maintain that system forever. The goal to me should be to build a life that's actually yours, that feels like yours, and everything is owned, including that success and that identity. And that's what I think the proving really is. It's that space between the formula that once worked and the life you're still building. The moment where certainty disappears a little and movement begins. I could certainly tell you I'm still figuring that out, still testing it, still proving. And if you're listening to this, there's a good chance that you are too. Wherever you are in your life right now, whatever chapter you're in, always keep proving.